Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us to finally understand the best practices that operators and OTT platforms should establish to reduce churn and maximize retention. My name is Nébié. I am coordinating the market research at Dataxis, and I will be moderating this session. This session that promises to be very interesting as churn and retention have become widespread problematics today in the industry. And this follows particularly the rise of direct-to-consumer services. We see that now every studio, content owners wants to have their own direct connection with their viewers and therefore their customers. So this will help them grow revenues, but it also implies that they implement efficient strategies to be able to keep these new customers entertained and have them stay on the service. So this is what we'll discuss today with our knowledgeable panelists. Let's see how they can help us navigate through this question. So today we are with Patrick Bearden, VP Business Development and Strategy at TIVO, Scott Favell, Technology Director at 7 West Media, and Mehdi Belhaj, Metadata and Recommendation Expert at Vodafone Germany. So first, can you give us a few words of introduction on your role and the service that you deploy? Patrick, let's start with you.
Thanks, Saga. So yeah, my name is Patrick Bearden. So I look after business development and strategy for EMEA and ANZ at TIVO. TIVO is part of Xperi, which has a broad range of products. So we look across TV and video and content, but we also look at automotive, and we do sound codecs. So we have a long history and a long range across a number of products. What I do personally, I look at a lot of new products, what's going to happen in 2 years, what's going to happen in 3-4 years, how the market's going, how our customers are going, working with the product teams and working with our CTO office to make sure that we can point ourselves in the right direction at the right time. So yeah, mainly focus around EMEA and ANZ.
Okay, Scott, also a quick presentation for our audience.
Hi, good day. I'm Scott Favell. I'm Technology Director at 7 West Media. So 7 West Media is one of the largest free-to-air and VOD players in the Australian market. So in my role at 7, that covers the software engineering side for the client devices, back-end services. It includes video streaming operations, so CDNs, things like that, content and metadata operations, as well as the customer service desk as well. So it gives me a good, I guess, broad view of the ecosystem. So I've been at 7 for about just over a year. Before that, I spent a few years at a government broadcaster, and then before that, I was at a long time at Australia's largest PayTV operator, Foxtel. So I've got various views on personalisation that span that either from like large scale PayTV, the government sector, and now in BVOD as well. So excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Okay, and Mehdi?
Right, so Mehdi Belhaj. So I'm part of the technical engineering and delivery department of Vodafone, Germany. So as the job title clearly describes it, so I'm mainly dealing with metadata and content recommendation topics. So from engineering perspective, mainly I'm closely in contact with the product design teams and the vendors mainly. So we have a couple of recommendation engine providers, mainly TIVO for the Vodafone Group TV solution, and we're trying together to provide the best customer TV experience, basically which is in Germany on the market.
Okay, so now let's dive into the core of the question. Churn is not a side topic for actors who rely on subscription revenues. So today we are talking about TV operator, SVOD, OTT platforms on the first line. And rising churn has a disastrous impact on revenues. So the first step to prevent churn is to understand the overall satisfaction or dissatisfaction of the different customers to then be able to tackle it and respond to it correctly. So I turn to the two content owners in our panel, Mehdi and Scott. How do you evaluate the satisfaction? Are you able to single out the users that might be at risk? Scott first.
Yeah, look, I'll go. So yeah, we've got, like, I suppose, like most modern platforms these days, we have a wealth of metrics, and the problem is not so much as not having enough. It's more of just wading through it. So we monitor everything from the quality of the streams, the buffering, because that sort of gives us is driving to churn. We monitor time on the site, so how people are navigating things, how they got to us through whether they're through an EDM channel or some other mechanism, and then we obviously watch. We observe how much they're viewing and what type of things they're viewing. Churn it's very interesting looking at it from now being on a free service relative to a pay TV service, because churn has I guess a bit more of a focus in some ways on a paid service, but the interesting thing, I guess, on the BVOD side is it's becoming a much more mature market. It's the management is starting to go, actually, how much is it costing us to market, get people on here, and what happens when they leave? So it's something that we look at quite extensively. Some of the strategies we've been doing at the moment, there's sort of a big focus on content discovery and personalization. A lot of that content discovery at the moment is manual on current platform. Previous ones it's been highly automated. So we're sort of on that journey on the current platform I'm on now. One of the things I guess has excited us a lot recently, and I think in terms of a longer term personalization is virtual channels. So we had what's the word I'm looking for? So we had a service, a show Big Brother that launched, and we stood up a channel just dedicated to Big Brother. We used some new technology, so it was that cheap. And while that's a curated exercise at the moment, what it did lead to was actually a 44% increase of viewing of the previous season of Big Brother. And so this technology is quite new, but we see enormous potential for it, and particularly moving it away from a curated experience to being something that is scalable to be personalized. So it's it'll be Scott TV, and I'll get lots of Star Trek and things like that, whereas my wife will get lots of location household shows. So we think it's a really important space, and I think it's particularly in I said the market at the moment in the BVOD space is becoming a lot more mature and contributing a lot more to the company's bottom line. So it's a big focus for us.
And is it a response that's specifically addressed to customers that might be at risk, that might churn?
Yeah, that's an interesting one for us. So we basically will segment our audience up into various segments, and one of those segments is about engagement and how often they're using the service. And so what we will do is use the data of this is a segment of customers that haven't engaged for a while, and then principally what we're doing at the moment is sort of EDMs or sort of push notifications, things like that, to try and sort of bring them back. That's our primary strategy at the moment. The push notification is interesting because it can be a lot more effective than EDMs. The key for it is just to not abuse it, and I guess that's always the temptation for marketing departments is to to send too many of them. But yeah, it is a key focus for us.
Mm-hmm. And Nébié, is it the same for you at Vodafone?
Well, I would like to consider the churn retention or reduction. From a different perspective. I would like really to consider it as a consequence rather as a target that we want to address. So, instead of trying to reduce the churn, maybe if we consider trying to understand why it is happening, why the customers are leaving our platform, and what do they need? And if we start working on this, actually, so we as a Vodafone, we are content aggregator. So we showcase content from different sources, and I think this is an advantage. In a way, we don't have like big pressure on selling content, maybe that we produce, or it's not the case. So we have customers. We need to understand. I think the key here is really understanding what is needed, what the customer is expecting from a platform, and also at the same time, a provider or a content aggregator, just in our case, I think it's very important to have a clear vision what you would like to do with the product and what kind of experience you have in mind, and how do you see the TV experience as a provider for it, right? So I think those are the two keys which will of course, lead into maybe a lower churn after some time. So in this approach, we would move from really a targeted approach into reducing the churn into a more maybe preventive way, which would give you a clear understanding of what you need to do and maybe how to communicate it, how to make it felt or noticed also by customers. So that, so we try to anticipate, and as a result of that, of course, it would mainly lead to a lower churn numbers. So we know, for example, the number of streaming services is really increasing, and so something which is very important for us is really to make it possible to a specific customer to access all the subscriptions that he has. I don't know, maybe Disney, Netflix, Amazon Prime, whatever. So we try to make everything accessible via our platform. I think another important aspect also, which is which we're working on, is in terms of metadata integration, and maybe how we could make sure that we have the content details from different sources in order to make a better match, maybe, and also be able to provide the best solution for a customer who wants to stream a specific content, maybe which is available under different platforms, but how to make it easier to stream using the existing entitlements, let's say.
So anticipate rather than respond to
absolutely
the customer. Okay, and Patrick, you have a more general view on the topic. So what are the tools available to operators and content owners to specifically identify and prevent churn?
Yeah, I think they're interesting answers from both the guys, because they hit on a lot of same tools, same topics that we do. I like Mehdi's qualification of it as prevention rather than reduction, right? You want to get there before the customer is dissatisfied, and that can be a number of things. That can be having great content, it can be having a great user experience, but then I think also personalization plays into this. And I think if you can make the viewer feel like they're watching their service, whether it's Seven or whether it's Vodafone, I think that really drives engagement. So we measure engagement as a metric that we measure. We measure things like effective catalog size to see what kind of content people are watching. But I think if we can get the right content to people quickly, then they tend to stay longer. And we're doing interesting things around A/B testing, around what works and what doesn't work, and even down to the level of the user. So when we have a product called TIVO Stream 4K, which is a retail product, you can go in, you can buy it, and you plug it into the back of your TV, and it streams all your content and aggregates all your content, much the same way as Mehdi describes aggregation. One of the things that we've started doing is actually doing A/B tests for the customer. So we will show the customer 7, 8 different choices of content. So do you like Game of Thrones, or do you like soccer, for example, or Succession, whatever it is? And based on those choices, we can personalize the experience from day one. And what we find is that there's especially on the content side for OTTs, there's a 15-day window where people will churn, because they take up a service. They might take up the service for one show or one event. And there's a high churn rate within that window. But if you can personalize that experience using A/B testing at the start, we see there's up to a 30% reduction in churn of those consumers. So it's taking lots of learnings that we have from our different products and personalizing where we can. I think Scott's point is a good point as well. Is you can't go down a rabbit hole of data, because that's very possible, right? You need to keep your head above water at a certain point and try and bring it back down to the customer level. And I think personalization does that, and I think good user experience does that as well.
Okay, so if we continue on this topic that Mehdi opened on personalizing the experience beforehand, so before realizing that customers might be at risk or might be not as engaged as we might have thought. So here the idea is to anticipate, to understand the demands that might not be formulated directly by the customers, but that operators, so aggregators, but also OTTs need to understand to provide the best user experience. Scott, on your side, how are shows presented on the user interface? How do you decide on those who will be promoted, highlighted, recommended to the end users?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways we do it, and it varies a little bit between platforms. But overall, the overriding principle is to get the user experience as seamless as possible between the different devices. And so, I guess from a UX perspective, we have a couple of key hero images that will kind of stand out at the top of the page. They're things that get driven by data, so there's an element of personalization in there, but there's also an element of curation, because it's being a BVOD provider, the content catalog's a certain size, and a lot of our content is really it's sort of tentpole operated. So we've got our key things, and so what we'll do is we'll put up those tent poles, and they're the big things people are coming to the platform to view. But what we'll then do is use, once we've got their attention, use that to then highlight the things that we think that they'll be interested in. The example I mentioned before, it's like there's a lot of great content. The problem is always finding it. And I was looking at a park survey earlier, and it was like the two things driving churn in that one was the big ones were basically cost and content. And we all know the long tail, and so the challenge is really just to get the right content up there. And what we've found is a lot of our back catalogue, if we present it in the right way to the right users, in particular the key thing is the right users, that can actually outperform a lot of the new stuff. Some of that content's like 10, 20 years old, but it's got an audience there. The challenge is really getting it into the right audience. So I'm not quite sure if that answered your question, but
so there's a strong implication of the editorial team in the recommendation and presentation on your website.
Yeah, it's both. There's a good editorial side of it. I guess our roadmap, as far as the maturity goes, is to get to a lot more personalized, and that really comes. A lot of it is around scale, because you just can't, as more content comes to the platform and more users come on, it's just not feasible to throw people at it. And so leveraging machine learning and then those sort of techniques is really the only viable way to do it at scale, because it's not possible to hire enough people, and even if you did, you're not going to know what they were watching. So the personalization is, to me, it's a must, and to be honest, that's really a table stakes in this kind of environment. If you haven't got an element of that, you really got like one hand tied behind your back.
Mm-hmm. Could I ask Scott a question? Just follow on that. I'm just interested in, because in Mehdi's world and in my world, we aggregate all this content and all these providers together. So Scott, I guess you've got two challenges, right? You've got in your own domain, how do you keep people focused? Do you guys think much about when it goes outside of that into a super aggregated world? Like, do you feel like you lose control there, or are there tools that you can bring in?
So when the content sort of goes off platform, or just sorry, if I get the question.
If it's in a super aggregated solution where you might have 7 content next to Netflix, next to whatever.
Oh, absolutely. So we're syndicated off onto all the platforms you'd expect. Roku's down here by Telcos TV, or an Apple TV, everywhere else that you'd expect. And it is actually probably an area where a bit of a disadvantage at the moment, because something like Netflix, for example, that carousel strip that you get on Netflix is a personalized experience. They're probably the leaders there. Most other platforms, including us, don't offer a personalized strip in those carousels. So that's a key factor. And then there's the unified search as well, where it's it's a challenge if you're a smaller player in those, to get your content surfaced up. And I think that's really where the sort of richness of metadata comes up, because the broader the metadata available for any particular title, I guess, is that the more likely it's going to come up. But it's definitely a challenge for a smaller player, for sure.
And I'll turn to Mehdi, the expert in the recommendation and discovery. well, Vodafone is positioned as an aggregator. So what are the characteristics of the recommendation tool that is used by Vodafone?
Yeah, so actually what Scott mentioned is really interesting, because I mean, as a customer, it always happens to me that I judge a movie based on its cover, right? So the artwork is really important. I think that's how we human beings are made. And the visual aspect is really important. However, on the other hand, I'm an engineer, right? So I focus more, I mean, it's stronger than me, but I focus more on the technical aspects. And the question I always ask myself is, what makes Game of Thrones, for example, so successful, right? So I would like to see a tool which ingests all the metadata from all the content, ingests all the user behaviors or like the purchase details and so on, and automatically identifies the most relevant fields and the metadata that lead to a successful event. It could be, and most probably it's going to be a set of different combinations, I mean, or maybe a combination of different fields, right? It's not necessarily, I think, until the very, last years, we always had the assumption that maybe the genre is a very relevant field. But now we started to say, maybe to realize that it's not that obvious and that someone could watch like the same genre or movie genre for 2-3 consecutive days and then move to a completely different thing and so on. So the question is, what is the most relevant field, and how maybe can we say, or can we even anticipate on the trending content for next week or for next month, right? I mean, we as an aggregator, we receive like thousands of events beforehand before we make them or we make them available to customers. And if we work on some machine learning or maybe artificial intelligence, and of course it's going to be a learning exercise. It's not going to be like straight away, but if we manage to have this kind of logic or smartness and bring it to the system, and I think we rely pretty much on TIVO for this, because I know that you guys, have been going through this approach. So I think we need to make predictions. We need to understand what is happening on our platform and learn out of it.
Through metadata.
So let's feel Mehdi said, which is just on the like on the box cover one, which I think is actually really good. I think it's a really a good example in terms of best practices. I think having a key thing is really just having multiple images. Even to be honest, even if you haven't got a lot of smarts in terms of which one that gets presented, and at least it keeps people interested. Oh, let's have something new, and if you can take it to the next level and personalize it based on either viewing or declared gender or something like that, then it's not a step. But I think just that Mehdi's point about the the box cover and the images. We're very visual. We're a very, very visual species. So to me that's one of the key things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so visuals are one way to enhance, improve metadata. And Patrick, what are the directions of metadata to be improved and fulfill Mehdi's wishes?
Yeah, I think it's funny that we're talking about metadata, because when I left college like 15 years ago, my first job was in metadata, and I thought we were done with that, but it's back. And I think it's back because these aggregated solutions just make it so hard to find content. Everything the guys are saying. I think our approach is definitely having great images and moving to the point where you can personalize images as well. So maybe we see different images because of our different interests, but then also that deep level metadata that Mehdi touched on, where you can't rely on editorial teams to create so much data, because it just gets expensive. And genre is not it's only one field. That's not enough really. So we look across, we use AI tools to look across entertainment sites, wiki sites, our kind of global metadata, and we pull what we call deep discovery, which is themes, tones, moods, eras, maybe movies about the 1930s, because you could have a horror movie about the 1930s and you could have a comedy about the 1930s. And actually, there's a good chance you might like both of them, but in a traditional metadata world, you would not find that link if it was just, you know, horror versus comedy. So I think going deeper and you know, using automated tools to find that data is key from an expense perspective. But I think that comes back to the point that the reason I was asking that question of Scott about how do you exist in a super aggregated world is it seems like metadata could be the, you know, the answer to that for content owners, where if you can have rich metadata, then if somebody watches one show, then, you know, you can make it possible for them to find the next show on your service rather than getting dragged off to Disney or to Netflix, who, you know, probably have bigger spend on discovery than most of the local providers. So I think
just a tad.
I think, yeah, just a few $100 million more. But, you know, I think, yeah, like I said, I think it's amusing that metadata has become, you know, important again. But I think it is key, right? I think it's the only way we can level the field a little bit for everybody.
Yeah, okay. Maybe something more here. I mean, of course, in the end, the intention is not to replace the editorial work by a completely automated tool. I think it's not going to happen. It's more like a compromise. So, of course, I think the editorial team, in the end, they need like a human touch in the end, or maybe like something, a small adjustment that makes it, yeah, more personalized. But also, it's more about, for example, if we are able to provide a tool which can reduce the workload on editors by 70 to 80%, and at the same time provide a decent quality. For example, we can, I mean, as we said, so we could identify the popular content. I remember in our platform in 2019 or 2020, when the last season of Game of Thrones was released, the word Game of Thrones, it made its way to the top 5 searches on the platform. But the funny thing, we had absolutely nothing about Game of Thrones or related to Game of Thrones on the platform. We had absolutely nothing. The thing is that there is a specific content for which the customers is willing to do the effort and go search for that content, because it's very popular and it's extremely demanded. So I personally don't see a reason why to promote that content, or maybe to make it more visible, because anyways, people will go and make the efforts to search for it. So this kind of things, right?
And if we focus on search for 1 minute, so another innovation that could have an impact on discovery and recommendation in coming years is are the improvements in voice search commands. So this creates a very specific issues to be implemented. And here I would like to have Patrick's opinion. So can you help us understand the complexity of voice search, and also how it can specifically help to retain customers?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of the complexity is getting it right, because, you know, voice search is one of those things where, you know, if somebody tries it once or maybe twice or maybe 3 times, if it doesn't work, they don't go back. So you got to get it right out of the box. But I think, you know, there's been huge advances in the last 4 or 5 years around accuracy. So the ASR, which is the speech to text piece, where, you know, when someone speaks, what do they actually say? I think that's moved forward huge amounts in recent years, and you know, it makes sense, right? Because people are using more devices, they're talking into more devices, so there's just more data out there to improve the models. I think, you know, I'm a big fan of voice as a tool for discovery, because I think it answers the kind of question that we're talking about here, is that there's so much content out there. And, you know, they're coming from different sources with different budgets and different models. If you can flatten that user experience by, you know, being able to get to content much more quickly than if you had to navigate and click through a user experience, I think you're going to get people engaged. You know, everybody has a different metric about how long people will stay searching for content before they get frustrated and go to bed. You know, voice reduces that time to content dramatically. And I think one of the things that we see, specifically bringing it back to churn, is people who use voice solutions churn far less than people who do not use voice solutions. So for the kind of the big metric that we pulled out after many years of deploying this was that people who use voice, the churn rate is below 1% for people who use voice, whereas typically, I don't know, Scott and Mehdi will have their own numbers, but particularly it's 8-9%. So if you get that level of customer satisfaction and that level of customer retention, that has a huge impact across the board. Now, I think the challenge is there's a few different use cases for voice. One is you know what you want to watch. So you want to watch Game of Thrones, it gets you there faster than any other service. But if you don't know what you want to watch, it starts to become more conversational. And I think that's where it gets interesting because people are starting to be more conversational. Again, we're much more used to talking to devices, right? So we expect the device to have some kind of interaction. So you have, natural language understanding, but also NLG, where it's actually a two-way conversation. So I think that's going to become more important. But I think the challenge for all of us as service providers is how do you make your content discoverable in that scenario? And again, I think it comes back to, can you have deep level metadata, which actually, allows it to be surfaceable. So if I say, show me comedy movies from the 1930s or comedy movies about the 1930s, which is a different thing. If you can make that find your content, then I think you're onto something. I think it makes a huge difference.
Okay, and just one more comment because we are progressing very fast in our session. One more comment from content providers and platforms. When we are talking about aggregators or platforms being gateway for content, we usually refer to the device that is the gateway, but the device is usually shared between the individuals of a household, so usually a family. It means that the preferences of each individual can be mixed up in the data collection and in the recommendation. So, Scott, how do you personalize the proposition to customers?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. At the most basic level, it's like, you've got to at least have your customers logging in, and I think there's most places do that. Certainly if you're a pay service, but it's something that the free area has only come to in the last couple of years. And then the next kind of level on is obviously the individual profiles. But there's, I guess, if you haven't quite got there yet, one of the key things you can do is shift your recommendations by time of day and things like that, because there tends to be a different audience versus the daytime versus early evening, so on. So that's a very it's probably the coarsest kind of level of personalization. Then obviously it's profiles, and if you've got people that are logging in, then you can collect all data that's very, very specific to them. So I think it's probably the most the basic and key thing that we can do.
Mehdi, what are your views?
Well, from my perspective, that's still an unresolved challenge, let's say, because I think there have been a lot of approaches like the user profiles, for example. The main problem is that customers, and I think that's a human nature again, we are too lazy even to change a profile, right? If I'm on Netflix and I'm on a family profile, I'm too lazy to go to my personal profile and search for something. So there have been ideas about maybe inserting some small camera maybe on the remote control and do some kind of face recognition. The problem, of course, is that the hardware would be more expensive, and so I think that's the challenge. Maybe Amazon Alexa also, it tries to recognize the voice of the person who's speaking. So I think, those are some attempts how to resolve the issue, but it's, as I said, I think it's still unresolved and still need to figure out how to do this, to be honest. Because again, the main challenge is really the laziness.
I think just on that, I think from our perspective, actually, you hit on two of the solutions that we see. So biometrics through voice, I think, breaks down that laziness a little bit because you could just automate that solution, which works great for kids versus adults. But then also the camera thing is interesting because there's an expense on the device and there's a privacy issue there as well. But I think if you see more set-top boxes and more TVs coming out with cameras inbuilt for Zoom calls or whatever, using those to drive some kind of personalization, I think is an area that we're looking towards in the future. I think that's a powerful use case.
Okay, so that gives a glimpse into the innovations that we could expect for coming years. So unfortunately, we don't have more time. We reached the end of our session. So I would like to thank our panelists for their insights on this market. It was very helpful for everyone in the audience. If you have more questions, we can continue the discussion on chat in the platform, and I'm sure that our panelists will be happy to get in touch with you. We have a 15-minute break before the next panel that will be dedicated to understanding how many platforms can the OTT market handle. So thank you all. Thank you, Patrick, Mehdi, Scott, and I wish you all an excellent day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.